She placed her hooves on Big Mac's chin and stared into his eyes, her own alight with passion and need. "Oh, God, please, 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 eat me out, right now." She looked about ready to explode, her voice dripping with desperation. Big Mac wanted to help her, he really did, but he wasn't getting the picture. Wait, what do you mean by cheerily, exalted, loudly, exasperated, "Just eat my fucking pussy!" Oh. Well, she didn't need to tell him twice. She laid back on the other side of the couch, and Big Mac was instantly there, sitting in between her legs. So, what do I do here? Everything looked so complicated. It was like trying to build something without a manual. Jerry looked almost pained by his constant hesitation. "You'll figure it out," she huffed loudly. Nothing ventured, nothing gained, Big Mac thought to himself before diving right in between her thighs. Without even touching her, Big Mac could smell her wetness, a sweet, sickening aroma surrounding it. Lowering his mouth down to her slit, it was like he was almost drowning in simply just the odious fragrance of it. He stuck out his tongue nervously, still unsure about his actions here, and gave a wide lick at her. Cheerily yelped involuntarily at his first touch, before dissolving into a long, drawn-out moan. I'm going to turn down the sensitivity on my mic right here, because it's pretty high. I'm going to change it down to a 2. There you go. No, now it's on a 1. Now it's on a 3. There you go. Now there's 2. Gave a wide lick at her. Cheerily yelped involuntarily at his first touch, before dissolving into a long, drawn-out moan. Ah! She couldn't help but gasp every time his tongue contacted her folds, but his unseasoned skills were extremely obvious. Find my clit. Big Mac pulled his head up from her, his cheeks glazed with her moisture. Your what? Instructions weren't much use if he didn't know what the hell she was talking about. Oh, God. The nub thing! The big button! Whatever it is, just look for it! She yelled at him frantically, kneading his hot mouth back on her. Diving back in between her thighs, he instantly started looking for anything that he could please her with. In some ways, it was just like when they were back at kissing, just lots of tongue and a little coordination. He delved his snout deeper inside her folds, exploring her marehood for his sacred button or something. A little pearl-like object atop her slit caught his eye. He wondered. Cheerily shrieked and threw her head back, squeezing Big Mac's head closer with her thighs. "Oh, fuck! Right there!" She shook feverishly with every touch, even the most delicate brush of his tongue shooting spasms throughout her body. It was like he was literally pressing some sort of magic pleasure switch and wouldn't let go. His tongue swirled around her clit, teasing and taunting it. It was like she was a puppet. He could do anything he wanted with her, just sitting there and loving it. He considered stopping right there and forcing her to pleasure him to get her to finish, but the gentle colt inside him reluctantly refused to let him do that. Sucking and stretching, his mouth continued relentlessly, ravaging the now swollen clitoris he felt earlier as Cheerly's thighs constricted tighter and tighter around him, muffling his ears from her moans and cries, until he felt her entire body seize up. "Oh, God! Oh, fuck!" He heard her yells loud and clear, now coming up to reach a complicated crescendo of volume and bliss. She was trembling furiously, almost like she was having some sort of seizure of built-up thrill. She yelled one last time before reaching a final closing climax to Big Mac's efforts. He could feel her gushing excessively into his muzzle as her body was wreaked havoc upon by waves and waves of orgasm. She desperately humped her groin into his face before finally reaching a close to her dramatic peak of pleasure. Panting and puffing, Cheerily slumped over ever so slightly, trying to get a better view at the stallion between her legs. She grinned tiredly down at him. "Get up here." Big Mac obeyed oh so willingly, tracing a wet line from Cheerly's crotch to her mouth with his own, planting a kiss on every inch of her body. He worked his way across her stomach and up before finally coming to a hard landing right on her lips. He kissed her lovingly, caressing every part of her body he could reach. It had never occurred to him that someone could just captivate another's attention so much. He hadn't ever felt like this before. Like all he cared about was her and her alone. Every brush of the skin felt electric, shooting rays of heat through the both of them. Tasting her own juices in her mouth, Cheerilee was obviously enjoying herself as well. She pushed against Big Mac's chest lightly, breaking their kiss once again. "Why do you have to be so great at everything you do?" She breathed next to his ear, a smile evident in her voice. His pride was going through the roof. "It all comes with the package, girl," he whispered back, chest thumping just a little more than he probably should. "Getting a little arrogant, are we?" Cheerilee smirked, adoring the pompous attitude she brought out in him. She placed her muzzle back next to his ear again. "Well, let me just take you down a few notches." This time she pushed harder against his chest, causing him to flip backwards onto the other side of the couch. Big Mac's stallion hood was now out and exposed, standing fully erect for all to see. Cheerilee scooted up in between his legs on her knees. She took a hoof and tantalizingly traced it up his length. "Yeah, you sure are a big one," she seductively cooed out loud to him. He strained himself from her first touch. His entire body felt like it was on pins and needles. Thanks." He was struggling to form words. Cheerilee giggled tenderly at his sudden loss of cognition. She could work with this. "I wonder if I can..." She leaned her head down towards the very tip of his member and gave it a tiny lick. "Fit it all." The instant her tongue made contact with his cock, Big Mac nearly lost it. He wanted to buck up his hips badly, especially with her mouth right over it, but he kept himself collected. Hunched over, he hungrily watched Cheerilee as she played around with his dick. She ran her tongue from the base of his cock to its tip before coming to a stop with a smile. "Ready?" she asked. Before he could answer, Big Mac felt the head of his member be engulfed by the hot wetness, nothing being able to resist the urge any longer. He bucked his hips hard into the source of the heat, wanting more. Cheerilee took it all in stride, sucking in even more of his hardened length. She teased the tip with her tongue as she caressed the sides with her mouth. Moving farther and farther down, she gradually took in more of him, before finally meeting the base of his cock. She looked up at him innocently, his member still reaching far into her mouth, and winked right in his face. Big Mac threw his head back and groaned loudly, knowing that if he watched her for any longer, he would come for sure. Hell, that cute little wink there nearly pushed him over already. He felt like he was about ready to explode. Coming back up for air, Cheerilee panted greedily, a heavy flush covering her face. She smiled devilishly, pleased with her work. Looking up at him, she idly icked away at him. "Don't you dare come yet, Mac," she seductively murmured in between licks. "We've still got a long way to go." She roughly placed a kiss right on the tip of him before heading right back to work, sliding her head down the slick rod. Not being able to help himself any longer, Big Mac peeked open his eyes back down at her. All he could see was a light purple mane bobbing between his legs with a mesmerizing rhythm. He could feel her skillfully filleting his member, the heat of her mouth moving furiously down and up him with the speed that could turn heads. As far as he could tell, she had her hooves on his thighs, stabilizing herself as she practically plunged her head down his shaft. It felt like she was literally sucking the life out of him. Every second it was starting to become more and more of a challenge for Big Mac to not orgasm. With the way that Cheerilee was happily blowing him like this, he knew that she would not give up until he blew himself out. The pressure inside of him was starting to grow, faster than before, just below breaking point. Big Mac tried to keep it back, but as soon as Cheerilee suddenly deep-throated him again, he knew it was over. Big Mac used his hoof to keep her down at the base of his dick, shooting his first few hot, sticky strands of semen directly into her throat. He came forcefully into her mouth, bucking his hips as far into her throat as he could fit. Her eyes widening, Cheerilee instantly realized what was happening and smiled against him. Big Mac shot the rest of his load finally, ending with a heavenly sensation of Cheerilee swallowing it all. You know, I've never really been that much into swallowing. In fact, I think it's kind of gross when a woman is just like, yeah. Although, it can be hot sometimes, I suppose. They sat there for a while, just laying on the couch. It was... Okay, guess what I should say here. Before I continue, just let me clarify. In hentai, when they swallow, I think it's pretty gross, because the sound effects are, they're all like... It's kind of... But, if you're watching, like, real porn and they swallow, I mean... It's not that I'm not, like, super attracted to it or anything, but it's not as bad. They sat there for a while, just laying on the couch. It was peaceful, really, but Cheerily eventually ended the silence, the sloppy sound of her slipping his member out of her mouth effectively breaking the silence. She looked up at Big Mac, both of them exhausted from their activities. He was staring back down at her. Hey. Hey. They were both quiet, content with where they were, just staring into each other's eyes. So, is that it? Are we done now? Big Mac asked, life starting to fill his face back up. Cheerily didn't even have to think about it. Nope. She suddenly perked back up almost immediately, her voice taking on a more flirtatious tone. We haven't even gotten to the main course yet. She got up from between his legs and walked over to the coffee table, winking once again. She turned around and leaned her body over the top of the table, revealing her beautiful marehood directly pointing towards Big Mac. As if on cue, Big Mac immediately was hard again from staring. She was sopping wet already, her muscles flexing and contracting, just imagining taking her like that. It sent chills down Big Mac's spine. He mumbled something incoherent under his breath. Meanwhile, Cheerily looked back over at him impatiently. Well, are you coming or not? Get over here and mount me. She arched her back slightly and pushed fruitlessly against the air, desperately needing something to fill her right then. Sweat sheened off of her coat. Shaking his wits back into him, Big Mac finally got up and walked over towards the lovely mare awaiting him. Her slit looked even more tempting up close, carefully shifting his weight away. Big Mac steadily leaned over on top of Cheerily, his mouth coming right up behind her ear. At this point, his throbbing length was just centimeters away from her tight wetness. Cheerily, teasing him playfully, purposefully pushed back and rubbed up and down the head of his girth with her entrance, electing a loud moan. How do you want it? He whispered heavily into her ear. The urge to pound right into her was already starting to cloud his thoughts. Cheerily smiled underneath him. Rough, she hummed back, pressing against him harder as she said it. Taking an ample breath of air, Big Mac mentally prepared himself for the onslaught of emotional and physical feelings he was about to put himself through. No looking back now. And with another generous inhale, he eased himself into her. As his tip slowly sheathed itself into her, the first thing that hit him was the heat. It felt so warm, like a burning fire type of warm. And soft, too. It was like he was moving through silk. Warm silk. He could feel as her folds tightened around him and pulled as he passed them, urging and coaxing him to go deeper. It was a tempting offer, just to slam himself inside of her and fill up to the brim, but he knew he had to take it slowly, at least at first. He worked his way inside her, gradually sliding more and more into her. The slow feeling of him spreading her folds apart made Cheerily whine with pleasure. It slid in, little by little, bit by bit, until the sound of Cheerily's flank slapping Big Mac's groin finally met their ears. Oh yes, he was in. Oh my! Cheerily trailed off with her moan, the feeling of him filling her up, distracting her. Big Mac gently nibbled down on the side of her ear. So, you wanted rough? His voice lowered an octave gruffly as he whispered in her ear. Yes, please, she drew out pleasantly, still dazed by the thrill of having his massive girth inside of her. If you say so, he brusquely confirmed in her ear, pulling himself out from inside her until just the tip of his member was primmed at her entrance. The sudden feel of emptiness left him by drawing a long whinny from Cheerily's mouth. Big Mac hugged her body, flush against his, and nuzzled into her neck lovingly, before slamming into her full force with a loud grunt. Cheerily cried out loudly with surprise and bliss. She reflexively flexed her muscles, causing her to constrict around Big Mac's member even more. But Big Mac didn't miss a beat either, immediately pulling far out before pounding himself deep inside of her again. "Oh, fuck, yes!" Cheerilee screamed out hysterically as Big Mac rammed her from the back again. She bucked up her hips against him as he penetrated her, a loud smacking sound emitting when their bodies collided. They both kept this rhythm of pulling out and pounding back in, smashing into each other with an aggressive hunger for each other. It was not the sweet, yet complex matrimonial lovemaking that Big Mac had always made it out to be in his mind. No, this was something different entirely, something full of lust and ache, something more simple, just made up of primal wants and needs. As their pleasures accelerated, so did Big Mac's thrusts. He was now hammering into her over and over, Cheerilee's aching moans and swears filling his ears. Sweat was gathering on his brow as he pumped. It was starting to become more and more of a challenge for the pressure inside him not to boil over, the sexy noises slipping out of Cheerilee's mouth doing nothing to help. Big Mac rocked against her even harder than before. If he was going to finish soon, this was at least going to make sure that he did. A newfound desperation began to drive him as he drilled carelessly back into her, making sure that every time he thrusted that he would fill her to the absolute fullest. Pressing his body down harder on her, he fucked her with every ounce of will that he had left in that soul of his. He could feel her juices squelching out into his groin just from the simple force that he was pounding her with. I think I'm gonna... Cheerilee's words trailed off in a pleasant tone, her timid mind too busy being overloaded with bliss. She was literally drooling, her mouth hanging open like a dog's. Suddenly, her body spasmed wildly underneath Big Mac, a splitting groan bellowing from her mouth. As she climaxed, Big Mac knew he was gone before it even happened, when her pussy contracted and squeezed his cock, begging and beckoning him to come inside her. It was too much for him, the waves of orgasmic pleasure already swallowing his up. As he emptied his seed deep inside of her, he slammed one last time into her before pulling out of her and taking a step back. Spent. Big Mac admired his work with a slight smirk on his face as his cum, mixed with her own juices, dripped out of Cheerilee's pussy and onto the coffee table sloppily. That's disgusting. Meanwhile, Cheerilee was gradually waning off her orgasm on the table, still panting heavily from their activities. After a moment for catching her breath, she flopped back down onto the couch, exhausted. She gazed up at Big Mac. You cannot be a virgin." Big Mac sheepishly grinned back down at her, his softer personality showing back through. He carefully lowered his body back down on top of hers, mindfully keeping his weight from crushing her much frailer frame. Breathing calmly, he lowered his mouth to her ear. "Not anymore, I ain't."